Hey, welcome to the channel, or welcome back to the channel. Either way, I'm so glad you're here, and I hope you're having a lovely day. Today, I'm going to be showing you how you can get one of these awesome 30th anniversary DualSense controllers for half of which you would have to pay if you tried to get one now. Before we get into that though, if you find that you're having a good time with this video, it would really help me out if you left a like so the algorithm knows that you like my kind of video. And if you want more videos like this, you can always subscribe and ring the bell so you always know when I release a new one. But thank you for sticking around through that. Now, onto the video. Alright, if you've been around the channel, you probably already know I'm a huge fan of retro gaming hardware. There's just something about it which just feels right to me. And before you call it nostalgia, I didn't even grow up with these retro systems. Sure, they were technically around when I was growing up, but I never had one and none of my friends ever had one. Just about the most retro console I ever had was the Wii, and that is a decidedly different aesthetic altogether than the iconic grayish era of the late 80s and 90s. Now, just because I didn't have any of this style of console doesn't mean I can't have nostalgia for them. I'm well aware of that, so if you think that's what this is, sure, I won't argue with you. But to me, it just feels right. There is just something so much more personal to me about the designs from that time. And there seemed to be a willingness to embrace expressive design and really say something with your hardware. And while many people may malign this time in computer design for being the era of the beige box, and I certainly think there is a bit of survivorship bias going on with the hardware we consider emblematic of the time, I still think this is a special moment in hardware design. It was a time when all the functions of a computer were still fairly separate. You had a component for reading disks, another component for writing them, and you needed different expansion cards for basically any function you wanted to get outside of basic word processing. Basically, every function had an accompanying hardware component. And in a world where that is the norm, there's a lot of room to play with all those different components. And I think that's where a lot of the personality that this time period had comes from. Well, I mean, that and minimalism hadn't quite taken over yet, so this kind of design wasn't looked down on quite like it is today. And that is why I love the design of the PlayStation 5 so much. Is it gaudy and selfish in its size and overall opinion? Yes, absolutely. Do I personally think it's attractive? No. However, I deeply respect its willingness and Sony's willingness to have an opinion. When you stand it up next to its direct competitor, the Xbox Series X and S, there is no comparison in my mind. The PlayStation outclasses the Xbox at every turn from a formal standpoint. They've made beautiful use of complex curvature, organic elements, and unbelievable attention to detail in the texturing applied to the faceplates. Whereas the Xbox, by comparison, while still certainly an impressive bit of industrial design in its own right, just has nothing on the PlayStation to me. Now, I can admit there is certainly something beautiful about a platonic solid done well. There's a certain quality that designs have when they invoke the almost primordial powers of perfectly constructed, precision-designed basic forms. And there is something about the Xbox that just tickles the brain, and I can certainly see the inspiration behind the Xbox's design. However, to me, it's simply flaccid in its opinion. There's really nothing to be said about it other than that it fits rather nicely in an entertainment stand. It has some cool elements, like I like the way that they used green plastic to make it appear as though there was a light glowing from within the cooling system. I think the array of holes for that cooling system is quite pleasing, and the slight curvature that it has adds a lot to a part which would have otherwise been rather boring. However, when taken in full, it's just a rectangle, and perhaps for its purpose, that's all it needs to be. It just gets out of the way and lets you play games on it. And from a consumer standpoint, I might be able to sympathize with a desire for that kind of design. However, from a hardware design standpoint, I simply can't abide it. It's boring, oversimplistic, and entirely mute. And looking at the PlayStation 5 in comparison, while I can certainly understand the ire the design gets from a personal aesthetic standpoint, the only reason it's received that way is precisely because it dares to have an opinion. In a funny kind of way, it seems to harken back to the days when computer hardware design leaned more into the absurd and almost avant-garde. It has something to say about design, and it says it loud and proud. It says that your hardware doesn't have to simply be a vessel for function. It can also be an art piece in itself. Anyone can sketch a rectangle and call it a computer, but it takes real thought, real vision to create something like the PlayStation 5. Now, perhaps it could have used a slight bit more thought, given that it can struggle to even stand reliably no matter the orientation, but I'm far more lenient of that kind of oversight when the design itself is as out there as the PlayStation 5. Imagine setting down 1,000 people before we ever got a glimpse of what the PlayStation 5 would look like and asking them to come up with a concept of what they think it might be. They would probably all come up with some variation on a simple box. That is an easy idea to come across, but the one they landed on is far different from anything anyone at any table would have ever come up with. And that, I think, is what makes the PlayStation 5 such a perfect system to get a retro-inspired special edition. That's right, though. You're not here to listen to me wax poetic about the design of the PlayStation 5. You are here to learn how you can get your hands on the limited edition 30th anniversary DualSense controller for around half of what it would cost you on eBay. And we will get to that in a second. However, I first want to introduce the system that inspired this in the first place. Back in September of 2024, Sony announced to the world they would be releasing a limited edition PlayStation 5 SKU in honor of the 30th anniversary of PlayStation. To honor its legacy, they decided to make the absolutely phenomenal decision to go with a retro gray colorway harkening back to the very first PlayStation, and covering every related peripheral in the same beautiful retro gray that immediately brings to mind the legend that is the original PlayStation. And what better system to honor the OG with than the PlayStation 5? We've just covered why, at least I myself think that the PlayStation 5 is designed very much in line with the values of the day when the original PlayStation was released, so it just kind of feels right to see it get the retro gray treatment, and I mean, just look at it, it just works. Now, many of you will probably say that it's just a color change, and the fact that they had the audacity to not only limit the availability, but charge a premium for it is ridiculous, and I'm not here to argue with you about that. I would agree broadly. I personally don't think there is any justification for artificially limiting the supply of a product which is in such high demand. And given the slight premium they wanted for the system, mixed with my lack of funds at the time it released, I had to pass on the opportunity. However, that fact didn't really bum me out all that much, even though this was exactly the thing I had been wanting to see in console design for at least the last 5 years. But it didn't bum me out because I know myself, and I know that if I want something bad enough, I'll either wait until I have the money to buy it, or failing that, I'll just make it. Now, I'm not really interested in the console itself. I don't really need or want a PlayStation 5, and while the 30th anniversary was tempting, it didn't change that I really didn't need it. However, something I do love to have on hand is controllers, and I had been waiting to pick up a DualSense for use with my PC for a while, so this new colorway was perfect for me. It had the great retro vibe to it, and I absolutely adored the way they themed all the buttons to call back to the original PlayStation logo design. However, again, I couldn't really justify the price of the controller. I mean, $70 for a new DualSense is bad enough, but slapping another $10 on top of that just made for an even less appealing offering. So I passed on the opportunity, knowing that eventually I could just buy a used DualSense and swap out the shell for a third-party dupe of the original. And this is where I should mention there are certain ethical dilemmas brought up by this practice. After all, there really are designers out there who did real work on this project for Sony. However, given the dubious ethics of limited drops from large companies who absolutely don't need to hedge their bets, I really don't take that much of an issue with it. Plus, because it was limited edition, my doing this has absolutely zero effect on their bottom line. Everyone who was ever going to get paid has already been paid, so I'm fully comfortable recommending this to you if you want to. However, if it is something that makes you uncomfortable, that is understandable, and for those of you who take that stance, there are plenty of listings on marketplace websites for these official Sony DualSense controllers. However, and this is where the half the price bit of the title comes in, those go for anywhere from $150 to $250. So that's not exactly a deal. Plus, a grand total of 0% of the money from that purchase goes towards the people who made it, so it really is functionally no different than doing what I'm suggesting. And I should mention this mod that I'm doing actually doesn't technically cut down on the price. Altogether, without shipping and taxes, it's probably around $80 to $100, all said and done. So I'm really not saving any money with this when compared to if I had just bought it at launch. However, that's not really the point of this. I love tinkering with my stuff, and that's really why I'm doing it this way. However, since you can't buy this same colorway from Sony anymore, the actual price is whatever people on the internet are asking for it. So in that case, you are saving money. Plus, if you already have a PlayStation 5, it probably came with a controller, so you don't need to drop the extra cash for that. So then you really are only out $40 for the shell kit, and in that case, you're way ahead. And this is something I think more people should be open to. If you buy a quality shell replacement kit and make sure that you keep track of all the bits and pieces, this can be a really rewarding modification and a really great way to enter the world of hardware modification. Once you see just how simple it is to open up your hardware and change it to make it what you want, even if it is just cosmetically, it opens the door for all kinds of different possibilities. I did this with a kit that I found on Amazon for my Joy-Cons, and I absolutely adore how these turned out. So I really hope this video can get the ball rolling for your interest in modding and making cool things for yourself that makes your life just a little bit better. And speaking of that, let's take a quick moment to thank today's sponsor, PCBWay. PCBWay should be your first stop for all your techie DIY project needs. Despite what the name implies, they don't stop at offering PCB prototyping, printing, and assembly services. They also boast the ability to deliver 3D printed projects made from all kinds of fancy materials you would have no hope of being able to print with at home. No matter what the project may be, PCBWay have a service to cover it. They offer everything from standard FDM printing to SLM and PolyJet, but they don't stop there. They also provide CNC machining, sheet metal fabrication, and even injection molding services. So no matter what the scale of the project is, you can be sure PCBWay will have whatever you need. But if you're more into smaller projects you can tackle in a weekend, you can check out their module store and browse all the interesting products they have available there. Everything from soldering irons to robot dogs. It doesn't matter if you're in need of large-scale injection molding services or just looking for a fun weekend project to work on with the kids, PCBWay has what you need. So a huge thank you to PCBWay for sponsoring this video, and now we can get on to the actual mod. Okay, so I basically just started out with a bog standard DualSense controller. I found this one on eBay for like $30-40. It's the one that I got is in pretty good condition, but one of the benefits of this kind of mod really is that you can buy a DualSense controller that still works, but the shell of which is very mangled and very busted, and you'll find plenty of those on eBay. And normally somebody might kind of complain about that, but in this case, not so much, because we're replacing the shell anyway. So let's get to that shell replacement. This is the kind of number one tool you're really gonna care about, that and a screwdriver. Just a spudger to really get in underneath these pieces that are kind of clipped in. Generally, I don't like clip fixtures on plastic parts like this because they have a tendency to break and really cause issues down the line for like repairing and stuff. But these ones aren't too bad. They're pretty flexible, and everything just kind of popped out pretty nicely. So now that we have that bit off, we'll locate the first two screws that we're going to be removing, and those are just underneath the kind of palm area of the grips. So we'll just take those out using my handy LTT precision screwdriver. Generally, I would advise making sure you know where you've placed all of your pieces. For this, there's only about like 5 or 6 screws, so it's not really a big deal, and they're all the same screw, so it doesn't really matter if you keep track of where they went and everything. so I just put mine to the side. But generally, it's a good practice to make sure you know where all the screws came from and where they are. But yeah, back to the spudger. We're just popping open the shell. This is probably my least favorite part of this mod, especially because I didn't consult the iFixit teardown beforehand. That is something that I would highly recommend doing, because it just kind of gives you an overview of where all the screws are, what you need to look out for, and things like that. In this case, it's pretty straightforward. We just pry apart the two halves, undo those two little clips there, and you can see here that I'm kind of wrenching on it. That's because, like I said, I did not consult the teardown and do not realize that there are two screws underneath both of those bumpers. That was causing me quite a bit of issue when I was doing this. Fortunately, I had the insight to look at the iFixit teardown, which you'll see me do here in a second. So yeah, I would highly recommend doing that for anything that you're taking apart. But you'll see here that I figured it out, and there goes the bumper. I found that later, but just make sure you keep track of all your pieces, keep them nearby, kind of make a mental note of where they are. So now we have the two screws that we're going to be using to let that top half of the shell release from the bottom half. And everything is kind of fixed to the top half of the shell. So once we have these two separated, you can kind of see that most of the stuff that we actually care about is just totally fixed to that top shell. So the next thing I would recommend doing is to remove the battery, because you don't want to be shorting anything out or anything like that. So now you can kind of see where all these screw locations are. You're going to want to ignore these 4 screws here. Those are just holding different parts together. For what we're doing, we don't need to touch those, and it's best that we don't. Instead, we're going to take out just these screws, which are holding the main controller assembly into that top shell. So we'll just do that right now. Sorry for any of you who don't like the sounds of slurping. So yeah, we take that little battery holder off, and we can just kind of slide this little ribbon cable out of its connection. There's no retention mechanism or anything to worry about, so you can just pop that right out. And then we have access to all the buttons and the touchpad assembly, which is going to be our next step. You're going to want to save these rubber pads, because at least the kit that I bought didn't come with them. If yours does, then I guess you can just do whatever you want with them. Sorry, I kind of dropped the shell out of focus here, but you can see I'm taking out the assembly for the touchpad, and this only has one screw holding it in. It's a little bit confusing part to take apart. This plastic bit and the PCB, which is attached to that white plate, are held together with basically like this little latch on one side, and you just kind of have to yank on it and pull the white plastic off the black piece kind of away from it. But once I did figure that out, it came apart fairly easily without too much issue. This is where the real fun begins, because this part is actually just glued straight onto this white piece of plastic. And after trying really hard with this scraper from my printer, I decided I didn't want to break the PCB in half, so I just looked up what people recommend for this part. And this is where I would kind of break from what people necessarily recommend. People on the internet seem to just say to just stick something underneath it and scrape away the adhesive. This is probably fine, and I did get away with doing it. I would recommend probably using like a heated rice bag and just placing it on the back there, but you can kind of see it's just covered in glue. So if you're able to loosen that up, that would hopefully release a lot easier. But now that we have it off, now that we've been through all that, we can just stick it right onto the new plate that we're going to be using. It fits really well. The adhesive is still relatively sticky, and everything works fine. So now we're going to replace that little light diffusing ring back into the shell, our new shell, that is. And then here you can see that little latch mechanism that I was talking about, and it just goes together really easy after you kind of figure out how it's stuck together. Then we're going to want to attach that back plate to the touchpad, and you can see I kind of pinched the ribbon cable. Fortunately, there's enough space between where it's installed and where it's. I don't recommend doing this. Don't yank on ribbon cables. Fortunately, there was enough space there that I could just kind of peel back just a little bit on the plastic and just slide it in. Just make sure that you don't pinch that. It would be really bad if that broke. You'd have to buy a whole new assembly, and I don't even know if you can buy a new assembly, but I got it in just fine. So now it's time to move on to the buttons. The first buttons that I put in was the D-pad, and it is keyed, so you can't put it in wrong. It has a little key down in the bottom there. And for the pad that you want to use for that, it's going to look like this. It does matter which one you use. It doesn't matter which direction you use or which direction you install it in, so you can just put it in however it fits, but it does matter which specific pad you use. So you're going to want to use the one that looks like the one that I'm using right now. Just after a little bit of finagling, I get it in there, get it all settled, and then we can move on to the face buttons. So with the face buttons, they do technically have specific keys. The kit that I got doesn't have the exact same key. It's missing a couple spaces, as you can kind of see with these buttons. That doesn't cause an issue because they just kept the orientation keys the same, so the buttons are oriented correctly and they're in the correct slots, but yeah, they are slightly different, but that's probably just a quirk of mine. Then we just put the rubber membrane on top of that like we did the other side, and we're pretty much done with this top shell. Oh yeah, so my packet came with two different variations on the face buttons, this kind of clear style and then this more matte style. That's really just preference. Before we move on from this faceplate though, we want to put in the little rings, and that's just for friction. Then we can move on to the joysticks, and those are really simple. You just pull off one joystick and replace it with the new one. Very straightforward. Next thing we're going to want to do is put in those menu buttons and the home button. Now for this one, I did actually mess up. I forgot to take out this whole assembly piece, and so I just had to add that in later. But now that we've got it in, you'll notice that earlier on in this process, I kind of just yanked those two halves apart, and that broke the microphone. You can see there where it was attached, and it is now not. Again, not an issue for me, so I can just kind of remove this cable or ribbon and just get rid of it. I do want to keep the microphone in the correct spot so that everything looks fine, but that's something you're going to want to keep in mind. Yeah, so what do we have here? Next, we're going to be installing the battery component, the battery kind of housing thing. This little guy right here, I'm not entirely certain what it does. I think it's another microphone feature, but basically it's really finicky to kind of get it in. That you're gonna kind of just have to figure out on your own. I didn't find any tips or tricks. Maybe somebody else out there has them, but I couldn't find them. But now that we have that in, we can just screw everything together and replace the battery. And that's pretty much everything where it needs to go. You can see the controller is working still, so that's good. And then we can just replace the bottom shell and snap it into place. Yep, there we go. Put in the last 4 screws where they go, and we'll be pretty good. We're almost there. Nothing really interesting about this part. Yep, we're just screwing in screws, and replacing these can be a little bit finicky, but it's not hard, and you're not going to break anything. So just kind of feel around until they feel like they're going in the right way, and then it'll just snap right in there. Last thing is this component. It's a little bit weird. You just gotta kind of get it in at an angle and then bend it down. Don't try to force it too much. It doesn't require too much force, but once you get it in there, it'll kind of slide to where it needs to go. And the last tiny little bit is to just snap these 2 clips together, and we're there. Now we have our basically mint 30th anniversary DualSense controller. So yeah, I mean, as you can see, it was pretty straightforward. It was pretty easy, not too much of a headache, and we have a pretty good product out of it. So I hope you enjoyed this. But that's just about all we have time for today. Thank you for watching this video. If you made it all the way to the end, thank you so much. I know it was a little bit different from what we usually do, but I hope you had a good time anyway. I know that I did, and I'm very happy with the outcome of this project. If you have any need of PCB printing services, prototyping services, 3D printing, all of the stuff that PCB Wake might be able to help you with, go check them out. They really are a really great resource for tinkerers like you and me. But other than that, I'll just say thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. And as always, happy gaming.